I am Anna Marie Piersimone. That's not me, that's me. And right now, I'm mainly spending my time as an instructor and lecturer at Cal State Northridge. I teach a course called New Directions in Digital Media. It's a big fat survey course from the history of computing and the internet to all of the new realities that we'll be talking about today. And my former background was as a television and video producer, and I was with AFI for about a decade running their digital content lab. So, Christina is here. Christina Heller is the CEO and founder of VR Playhouse. We also have Mike Connolly here, Blackthorn Media, Pete Blummel with the Rogue Initiative, and Lily Baldwin, multi-talented, faceted artist and producer. And Ryan we've lost from our group, and that, sorry, is Johanna Sam from Framestore. I'm going to start with Pete, let him talk to you a little bit. One of the issues that we all kind of discussed ahead of time before coming here was about what the roles of these new realities are. Is it all going to converge into one R, or as one of our panelists likes to call it, a whatever R? Will they converge anyway? Are they deconstructing codes? What are the challenges? What are the enhancements of these new realities? So, Mike, I'm gonna go ahead and let you take it from here.
Who? Me?
I'm sorry, Pete.
Oh, go for it, Mike.
I'm so sorry.
So your picture's up there.
Well,
Oh, it's my picture.
take it away,
Yeah.
Pete.
Yeah,
Pete,
I mean,
I'm
well, it's defined in different ways for us internally at Rogue Initiative, but you've got the cinematic quality of storytelling, you've got this interactive and technology aspects to everything, so how you incorporate and make those both and neither when you're creating VR is something that's a challenge every day for people who create. For us, I think some of us already have talked about this in the past, so I'm not too far away. But at the end of the day, like, the storytelling has to come from a place where you're giving the control of the camera to the audience. And so does that deconstruct storytelling or structure? Maybe a little bit. I think there's a story. Really becomes how do you keep the attention of the audience or the player or the person in the experience through all the visuals and audio and all the other things you can do without controlling that frame, in a nutshell for me. I don't know if Mike, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think in the end, the goal of all of this technology is to make itself really purely transparent, and become a medium for ideas to go from one person's brain into hopefully several other people's brains, and that can happen in a VR context with your eyes completely occluded, or that can happen in your kitchen as you're making coffee in the morning, or that can happen as you go out and hunt Pokemon on the 405 or whatever. Those ideas all, the cleaner transit that those ideas make is what this is all, I think is really getting at that question of how these things converge.
It has a lot to do with physicality, the physical space and the physical being.
That's the R.
Huh? That's the R.
The reality is
We're going to just for you. Go ahead.
And also, I think at this point it's very important to note that no matter what R you're trying to tell your story in, the rules and the terms of engagement are not set yet and should not be set yet, because this is a very new medium, and everybody who tells you they're an expert in VR are probably lying to you. Besides, present company excluded. But
This is why they're here.
The whole goal of storytelling in VR is still to find the edge cases, to find the problems, to find all the rules that you are then about to break, so you can actually start making up this language of VR storytelling that has is established in other mediums for a longer time. And that's why it's very exciting.
Right, there's new nomenclature, new rules. What I think I'd like to do, and it might be smoother because we do have a group that have already been conversing. We were talking about how that probably should have been recorded then at the time. But if you would just lead me when you want me to show the clips, I have everything loaded in and ready, slide or something. So I like that that Mike and Johannes both riffed completely right on what Pete started out with. Since we're talking about this physical realm and physical world, and I know that was an important one to Lily, I'm going to ask Lily to move on and talk a little bit about the space, live action, performance, and the changes taking place in this medium.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here because I'm a kind of a maker, an artist, less technical. I was a professional dancer for years before I was making more experimental, visceral cinema is how I like to refer to it. And kind of a dear friend of mine who's in the space named Sashka Unselt, he just said, hey, let's work on something about 2.5, 3 years ago. And we created this piece called Through You that premiered at Sundance 1.5 years ago, and that was my foray into this space. And for me, I'm very interested in kind of removing the cloak of words and speaking as much of a subterranean truth as possible. And that sort of me as a maker is interesting. And VR has, it's a space for me to kind of go back to my roots and speak to people kind of body to body and get rid of words, because I feel like this whole idea of essentially story and our construct of story needs to be rehashed. Usually story exists in our concept of story in linear time, right, where we follow one thing, things happen sequentially. And this idea of a protagonist being inside of an immersive experience where they have agency proposes, a more kaleidoscopic approach to time, and therefore story that needs to be impressionistic. Story that is about sort of these slices of emotional moments. And that, in my experience, is what's effective in this space currently. So story is sort of an easy word to use for what I like to think of as a trajectory or an evolution of experience. So how can you bring that to life in a way with a whole new construct, which is what VR is proposing. So I don't have any answers, but these are ways that I'm thinking personally, and I just think it's a really fruitful space.
I'll jump in. So,
Thank you, Christina.
yeah. So one of the things I think Google came up with a term, story living, and that they were pushing that as a new way of expressing what we're trying to do in VR rather than storytelling. And it might sound a little cheesy, but I do think it's a little more akin to what doing a VR experience is like. And I think what's kind of interesting about the promise of a good VR experience is that it can teach us things that are much more similar to the way real life actually behaves. I kind of, like she was saying, like storytelling has a pretty definitive arc structure, and it works. But it's also deceptive, because I know when I was growing up, I watched a ton of movies, and you start to think that that's what real life should be like, that there is this beginning, middle, and end, and this like happy wrapping up of things. And then when you go into your real life, you realize it's not like that, and it can be like disappointing. So I think that there's a way to help people navigate their own lives by giving them simulated experiences where they can learn about like actions and consequences of actions, and the ripple effect that can cause and I think that there's sort of an interesting evolution that could happen there.
Well, play is creative. I love the name of your company. I have to admit that I look at that and I keep thinking, I wonder if they've been talking to Paul Rubens.
The Playhouse. Well, so I wanted to be clear, because it says I'm the CEO. I'm actually, I passed the torch of the CEO title to my partner Ian Forster last year, so just like to, but I was the CEO of VR Playhouse for the first 3 years of its life and continue to be a partner and co-founder, so just throwing that out there. But yeah, the Playhouse idea was inspired by the idea of theater, and the Playhouse. And obviously VR and immersive theater have a lot in common, and I think we're starting to learn from each other. I had an experience the other day where I was at a restaurant and we were waiting for a table. And we were waiting for a table for like 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the waiter dropped, one of the waiters dropped his checkbook or whatever on the ground. And the person I was with picked it up. And as soon as he picked it up, they were like, the guy came over, your table's ready. And I said to him, if this was a VR experience, that would have been the secret. You know, like you would have had to pick that up to get your table.
You know what it was, right?
Anyways,
That's
and I
very
think
good.
that's very inspired by the idea of immersive theater. And anyway, so that's where Playhouse came into, but it's also a little bit of a homage to Pee-wee's too.
And if
Yeah.
you rope it back to the idea of the actual language or the way to tell stories, I mean, at the end of the day, all we're doing is telling stories. Somehow, all our lives, every day, we just tell stories to people about what happened to us or what we want you to think about certain topics. So as a medium, VR is very promising, as you said, because it immerses you. It's overused in the industry a lot, to be honest. Like everybody creates immersive experiences, but I have read very immersive books myself. But the potential of it being very thought-provoking, just by the fact that I can put you literally into the eyes of anybody that I want you to, is very powerful. There is still a problem of how to tell those stories, because stories become non-linear and stories become hard to follow if you want to tell a linear story. What if you look away from the checkbook being thrown to the floor and you've never seen it? So how do you make sure that that is done? And I have a feeling that the games industry has actually solved lots of those problems for us. There's a little bit of a stigma attached to that, you know, games are only played by nerds in basements that try to kill monsters, but there is actually 30 years or 30 plus years of research and of actually lots of creative thought that went into this process, and there's lots to be learned from immersive theater, from games, from traditional films, from everything. So we are at this crossroads of trying to come up with
Isn't
this
that
new
somewhat of
idea everywhere.
Somewhat of the holy grail in a lot of ways is how to direct and stimulate this experience, whether it's emotive or even, you know, a sensory experience. I would say I know that I've been in movies where I've literally thrown a Coke over my shoulder because I jumped during a suspenseful moment, or books as well. I remember reading The Exorcist for the first time and constantly feeling that my bed was shaking and the room was. So something in that storytelling is leading us into having that kind of experience. How does that happen for you guys within your work? Do you have an example, and please let me know if you want to show something.
You know, my head goes to two places. It goes to the act of writing a story in the first place, and a story better be interesting enough on the first page to get you to the second page, and to every page that follows. And the VR experience ought to hook you in. You know, obviously a movie. You know, there's if you don't feel pulled into the experience, then the creator is, I think, you know, well, let's say at the very least missing an opportunity, and I would say more likely probably doing something really wrong. I don't know that that's answering your question, but it's certainly, you know, it's
Well, the first, I mean, there's, again, you said there's no rules. I completely agree. I think there's so much we can continue to explore in terms of the best way to create the impact with your work that you want to. But a really good place to start would be the setting. You know, where is this person, right? Because that's you wake up somewhere. So where, if you're in a VR experience, that is. So I feel like the environment and the physical space of the piece is a character in and of itself, and it's the first impression that you make on your viewer, and it's also where they will be trapped for the next however many minutes. So, you know, just with the same kind of attention to detail that an architect or a designer would take in designing a physical space to evoke a certain response in people, we need to be designing, I think, VR experiences that have that, you know, same thought process behind them. I could sit in a VR, in a beautiful, if I was in an extremely beautiful VR environment, I could probably sit there for 5 minutes and have nothing happen to me in it, and come out of it feeling like I still had a transportive experience and maybe even like that dopamine hit.
Let's take that as a segue actually into showing one of the pieces that that I gave you here with the I think what you got as the first one. You know, so this piece.
So I'm going to jump out of this.
Well, so the project that we're releasing in a few weeks, called Caliban Below, is really, you know, that's one of the reactions that we get all the time is, oh my God, this space, you know, this sort of, you know, I would say it's cathedral-like. It's way bigger than a cathedral. It's this gigantic underground environment that sort of mixes Renaissance architecture with a giant cave.
I'm sorry, with what?
A giant cave, and this motif of this sort of astrolabe motif is repeated throughout the piece. Let's go to the next piece though. So there's characters to meet in this space. There's a couple of characters that you meet along the way. There we go, that one.
Yeah.
And
Let's see. Well, they're live webcasting this, so I think that's why. Yeah, that's what I mentioned at the beginning. It's an unfortunate.
are you able to see some of the details there? I can't quite tell. Oh, nuts.
That's kind of a hard one, yeah.
The opposite of the effect inside the VR experience.
Right.
Although it is better. I was here once where
why
literally
it needs
the
to be
glass
more.
windows were directly across and streaming bright sunlight on the screen.
Well, why don't you talk
Nothing.
about how you conceived that? How
Yeah.
did you come up with the
Yeah.
idea for that space and
Gosh, it was a long time ago. The notion here began as the character, the anti-hero of the story needs to go underground, and the original conceit of the story was just to be, chased by his son who's been turned into a monster in this space. That sounds kind of trivial, but it's really about family tragedy and how families hand their junk down from one generation to the next. And so the fourth generation of this family gets locked away in this space. And I'm giving away the ending here, but you're playing this character without quite knowing who he is, that's been locked away in this prison for the last 40 years. And there's spirits everywhere. There's ghosts that you can talk to. There's the remains of this demigod that's sort of floating around as a wisp of smoke, that's full of malice but doesn't have all that much power over you. And what I love about this, what I love about the piece, though, and the reason I'm riffing on it per what you were saying, is one of the comments that we get. I thought we were making a piece that was about 10 or 12 minutes, and we're finding folks spend 35 minutes on average in the place, and that's spent really just in this kind of wow. And then we've built piles of details into the scenes, whereas you look at individual pieces of it, kind of wherever you look, there'll be some little piece of backstory that you remember as a hearing your voice inside your head. But I think it really speaks to both points. This, hey, let's make a piece that architecturally is interesting enough to hold your attention, and let's have a story that's kind of a la carte in that space.
It's really
Yeah.
about the space there. I'm sorry, Lily, were you?
I was, but why don't you finish and then I'll come in.
Actually, I was going to ask Johannes something, but I'll ask him after you. Go ahead
Okay,
and
I'll
say
just
what you were
quickly interject. I wanted to just talk for a moment about the kind of this space as a character, right? And through you, it was all live action. So, and this idea, of what you were saying a moment ago is basically every detail matters. Every detail could be seen. So no stone should go unturned. Every element should be refined, specific, and drive the story. The story should be evident, like whether it's the lighting, the color, the texture, what it's hitting on, interfacing with performance, into production design and production elements. So we basically moved from 1970 to 2015 in this piece through you, and we go through all these decades. And it's about following You Are a Lover with this woman as she gets older. And I really wanted to feature an older dancing human body in VR. So this woman, Marnie Woods, is 86 and was the last dancing member of the original Martha Graham Company. Long story short, designing these spaces, I come from film and flatty space, and so I worked with basically every production element. There's a camera on the corner of on one nightstand, and so going through each decade, having the camera evolve decade, like literally having that camera move decade to decade and be period specific, on top of refining that with the sound. So she clicks it as a camera that she uses, like from a Polaroid to a 1990s Nikon. All of these textures and specifics, you buy it, you believe it, and I want the viewer to trust me and have this be worth their time. So I build this trusting relationship, and I find it is about the details. So I just wanted to refine how I built out the specifics of a live action real space.
Yeah, no, thank you for
Another issue in that also, because we shot it a year and a half ago in the Jaunt One, resolution sucks. So details of fabric, I love seeing the pore of a body and sweat, and we can't see that. So I decided that, color could color and kind of bold geometric patterns read better in the production design because you don't have the details. So thinking of things more architecturally and graphically in space was actually really successful. Just wanted to just give some pointers for the
I think
space.
this might.
Yeah, I'll just say just to add to that, those theatrical design courses in college don't go to waste. They're actually useful for something in VR. Classical art, learning that, architecture, and then production design, blocking, all that stuff, lighting is really important, especially for anything you're doing in immersive or interactive.
Especially live action too.
Yeah.
Especially because you don't know where your user viewer is actually looking. So if you're not building out the world to full detail in any direction, you're limiting yourself to something that could have been done in a regular flat movie anyway. If you're just forcing you to only look forward, which leads me to I think one of the most important parts, which is actually purpose. If you don't build a story with or an experience with purpose, you will not succeed. Because like I always use the example, and I hope I never meet the guy who made the experience, and he's going to beat me, of the pool hall VR simulator. Like if I want to play pool, I go to a seedy dive bar in Silver Lake and play pool. But if I want to experience a sweating body, or going underground, or in our case explore mathematical formulas with a fractal explorer, those are all things that you can only do in VR, and there's no other way to experience that without it. So I think it's very important to not just take your run-of-the-mill flat experience and just think you should make this into a VR experience, because it's a unique medium that's very powerful when used right. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there's more mediums than just VR, and it's very important to keep it purposeful.
And I also think that if the creative class of people who've been making VR experiences, if they haven't been as successful in their endeavors, I don't think it's because they don't know how to make VR. I think it's because we've been working with tools and inside workflows that have been extremely limiting and challenging. Just giving a little bit of a nod to what Lily was saying about not having as much detail and with the cameras and things like that. I'm very optimistic with like these new sets of tools and things that are coming out now. People getting better at like scanning, like doing really good scans of physical environments, volumetric capture getting really good. Developers really starting to excel inside Unity and Unreal. So I think that once the tools to be able to create these worlds become good enough and easy to use enough that we can really play and experiment the way we want to, then I think that we'll start to see these experiences really start to soar.
It's kind of like not having the tools be in the way.
Yeah,
to leave to give some seamlessness.
Just to be contrary for a bit on the panel for once.
Not you.
Go for it. Go for it.
I'm a programmer and a creative, so I'm actually. I think it's oversimplifying the tools or the workflows is actually a trap as well. But I think the analogy of a movie set works really well. You have your creative, you have a director who is in charge of the whole piece, and you have somebody who knows every intricacy of the camera. And those people have a common language; they can talk to each other and understand each other. But it doesn't mean that a director needs to know which screw goes in what part of the camera. So I think there's just no set structure out there yet, because right now if you're making a VR experience, you either you're a creative who gets a programmer who doesn't get your creative really, and you're trying to figure out how this all works, or you're trying to hire a games company to do a movie and then that doesn't work, or you're trying a movie company to do a game and you're in trouble again.
But there are some,
right, but an example of this would be like,
yeah.
okay, so in very, very early VR experiment that I was trying to do, I wanted to simulate the experience of a woman flirting with you. Okay, so that was just something very cool and interesting to me. I was like, thinking about how, if you put somebody, not everybody has the experience of having a really like nice, warm, generous, beautiful woman flirt with them and engage with them, and honestly, that's just the truth. And so I thought, well, wouldn't that be interesting to be able to simulate that for somebody, and perhaps even just having that simulated experience would make them more comfortable than in a real life situation. But this was 2014, so I did it with a 360 with 10 GoPros that were stuck together on a camera, and I had an iPhone attached to the tripod with the actress a person FaceTiming the actress so that she could kind of look like she was engaging with you in the cameras, and then at the end of the day, you don't have agency, and you know, and so it kind of got maybe 40% there, you know, like she did a great performance, extremely naturalistic, looking right into the camera, so she's looking right at you. But because you can't, because it's not a truly interactive experience where your actions affect her responses, it kind of caps out at a certain point.
I kind of want to, I'm sorry.
And even if I was going to do that now with volumetric, there's still some limitations there. So
and it's also really funny because now you're in a situation where, you know, to pick up on that, you know, imagine I have a perfectly volumetric captured actress flirting with me. You know, the first thing you do is you do this.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
It looks really cool, and I wonder what the back of her head looks like.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's because you start to explore a world. So it's like this weird, intricate moment of like, everybody is new to VR, so the chances that you're putting your experience in somebody who hasn't done VR before is pretty high. So they're just going to look at it as a flat screen and you don't take any advantage of the medium, or they're going to start to go crazy and go somewhere where you're just like, no, don't look in that direction. There's nothing.
Yeah, the actress needs to start the experience going, first of all, don't move, look right at me.
Exactly.
All right, let's continue.
That's sort of why
I think
I'm playing Johannes's piece from his company a little bit to show that.
This is just to go back to the purpose. This is this is a fractal explorer. It just basically uses mathematical formulas to generate beautiful pictures that you can just fly around in because it's a mathematical formula. There's no end to it, so you can just literally spend years flying around in this world, and you will see somewhat repeating but still beautiful patterns. Which is a thing you couldn't do in real life. So it was just my cue on
right, and your
on
agency
purpose.
for the viewer's agency on that is to explore the physical space of it.
I think this all just, you know, I think the point that we're all saying that's really interesting, it's certainly resonant for me, is working with limitations and making limitations choices. Or can a limitation, we're innovation around limitation, and it's really nice when things aren't just what I want them to be. I like solving things. I
like to, I was going to ask Pete about that because you had, when you started bringing up the instance of controlling and creating the story world, and I know you were talking about, they had some really strong opinions on it earlier, on creating every aspect of it in a world. And also, when you can, I've got your trailer queued up. You can.
Oh, what was that last part? I'm sorry.
I said when you can answer my question, and then when you can, just let me know, and I've got your trailer queued up.
Oh, great. Well, I don't know. The limitations are what make things, to your point, awesome, right? I think
you can take that quote.
That working in a box and figuring out how to work inside that box is how I think great things come together. I believe, right? I think we have too much budget, too much money. Things just kind of start looking homogenous and such. But there's no shortage of that in virtual reality or augmented reality or any of the things that we're exploring in the emerging technology space as it stands, and creating things that we're used to making. We have a film background at Rogue Initiative and a high-end video game background, so we're trying to bring those two things together, and every day they kind of conflict, but every day that's part of the challenge, is building that bridge. And then that's not even talking about the production. This is just technology. You're not even talking about the production, the creative, the business of it, working with studios and high-end filmmakers and creators and writers and all that all have their own issues culturally, how to come together on something, which we could have a whole panel on by itself.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, most of the topics on this panel could be whole panels.
Yeah, for sure. We've all lived it, but we all agree, like, creating things with a beautiful environment that has cues to telling you the story and bringing you along through the story are really important, and figuring out how to do those within the technical specifications of the headsets are important.
It's the
I hope that answers your
motivation,
question.
isn't it, though?
It's a what?
The motivation. That getting the
and so
to be motivated to do something, to take the agency that you present them.
Yeah, there's all sorts of tricks and games you can do, and it works in film as well. The lighting and pulling people into the don't go into the dark, go towards the light. Simple things like that. That's a very simple example of many things. In games you tend to introduce a character that can help guide you along and be your guide through an experience. And so in our case with a project we finished recently called Crow, there's a very similar thing where we you have this fairy character that kind of guides you through, and she speaks to you, and she's very well animated by a good friend of ours. That's amazing, and so she looks great, and we kind of avoid the uncanny valley thing because she's a little fairy, and so you don't have to animate her up close as much, and then when she goes away, it's even less animation and things like that. So, but at the same time, you felt she's real because she acknowledges you, she tracks your head and all those fun things. But thinking about that up front as we're writing it and creating it, there are a lot of issues that you come up with that are
Right.
basically.
So how do we deal with that when the uncanny valley is every day for us?
Yeah, indeed. So I hope that answers your question. The trailer you guys will see is actually a short film meant to kick off a TV show that we premiered at Tribeca. The point being, just in the context of this panel, was that we create things that can kind of springboard from different mediums. So it's a show, a movie, a game, a VR experience, and how can they all kind of work together in some fashion down the line. So this particular thing called the 7/16th was born from an amazing idea from the filmmaker as a MASH in Space TV show. But
Right, no.
that said, the VR aspect, these guys entertain themselves with an antiquated thing called VR. And so adding context to it in another show or another medium and then creating content that goes into immersive out of it is something that we really thought of, and that's how we pitch it to the studios. So that's why we're showing this. So anyway,
Let me let it roll. If it will.
hope you can see it.
Hope you can hear it.
Yep, no sound.
God forbid they leave one of their precious robots behind. God damn it.
How many rounds do you have left?
Not enough. Well, that was fun. Thank you, Doctor. What are you doing? Pretty sure I'm getting fired.
You're a medic?
Probably ex-medic now, but yeah. Here goes my beautiful pension.
He's dead.
I can fix that. Kind of like the island of misfit toys. It was a good afternoon. It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the idea was just as we create a property, what we'll do is create all this kind of content that come out of it for games and for VR. But again, like them having these doctors in space that only have one way of getting their heads out of the war is being in this virtual reality environment and experiencing things in it. And so for us, as we create this world, we're thinking this is a great way to showcase something and create content that has context, right? That kind of makes sense in a story that's being told elsewhere. And that's kind of our shtick.
Great, thank you. Let's see, maybe we should show a little bit of Christina's.
Well, I realize that now that it's kind of a sizzle reel, so it just shows a bunch of clips from a bunch of different projects. I don't know in the context of a conversation about story that it's that important, but if you want to play some of it, you can see.
Get a little idea of what.
Yeah, a
Is there-
collage of the projects.
Is there anyone you want to highlight for respect?
Well,
to
I was going to
story?
say actually, if you wanted to quickly Google first person BTS, I think is what it's called. That it might, and we don't have to watch the whole thing. I forget how long it is, but that was a behind the scenes for that piece I was talking about with the flirting.
Is there a video?
It's a video. It should be. I would type in VR Playhouse too to get it. First person.
Is that it?
I would type VR Playhouse into the search engine as well. Oh, is it? Is it popular?
Yeah.
First person.
Yeah, the first-person shooter one?
No. Sorry.
I can think
I would type VR Playhouse into Google as well. I don't think it's going to know
Oh,
just
I
first
got
person
what you mean.
BTS is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see what pops up. Do we see anything?
BTS arrival at Los Angeles airport.
No, I don't know. Sorry,
I mean,
yeah.
here's VR Playhouse. Would it be just, that's what I already have,
You know
right?
what? Can I do it real quick?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry. I'll be
This is
back.
a series about a man awkwardly entering the dating world.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
I got it. Okay.
So let's see. Oh, and these are all the. Sorry. This one. Okay, yeah, this one right there.
Okay.
The second one. Okay.
Got it.
So you watch part.
Got it. All right.
This took us like years to finally release because it kept getting backburnered to client projects. But, yeah.
As you can see, it's magic hour. We are in Griffith Park right now, and we are about to do our first narrative 360 short.
We started First Person in August of 2014 with our very first 360 equipment as an earnest attempt to bring emotional intimacy and a person's psychological reality into VR.
You want to kiss me?
Yeah. At the time, a lot of the content was action sports content and travel videos, but there wasn't a lot of emotional content. So we were excited about exploring intimacy using really great actors that we had worked with in projects over the years. Now, after 2 years, it's finally getting released.
It was one of many of our attempts and continued attempts to crack the code or solve the puzzle of storytelling in VR.
The production process was very experimental. We worked with actors that all had a really strong foundation in improvisational acting, so everything was very loosely scripted, and as a result comes off really natural.
You have this avatar, you have this character, but you're not deciding what he says or how he engages. You're sort of a passive observer at that point.
This idea of all these like tiny little cameras catching this world around you feels a lot more like theater to me.
There was planes going over.
Yeah. At one point, I was like motioning the scene. I was like, no, stop. We can't use it. There's a helicopter.
But that, yeah.
But no, there's just a helicopter on our date.
You getting that?
No, I went outside. I went outside.
Some of that? Is that?
I went on a date.
We specifically worked with actors like Maddie, Nicole, Jet, Michael, people who had really interesting energy that would be compelling to engage with inside the headset.
There's a part of your brain that always knows when you're being shot that, am I in frame?
Yeah.
Can I do this? Can I move? This is, oh, it's like I'm on a stage. I can do anything. And I think space is really important for action, because if you feel comfortable in the space and you know the space, then your actions can be more lifelike.
Like when I first started, acting on camera, and to realize that, in a scene where there's 2 people, there's actually 25 people like just out of the frame of the camera all the time.
Right.
That's just the way it is. You don't need a whole camera crew to accomplish everything.
I felt
So if you
comfortable
want
being more
to,
naturalistic.
you want to cut it. I mean, it just keeps going. But
Yeah,
so
it's a good idea.
yeah. So the
Everybody knows what they can Google.
and I
it.
think what I think was really interesting about this doing this series was I do think the energy translated. That was kind of the thesis that I was trying to prove, which was if you had a person that has really good energy in real life and you put them across from a viewer inside a VR headset, can they feel that energy in the headset? And the answer was yes. Everybody loved Maddie, just like I knew that they would. So, yeah. I think that was a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about than the sizzle reel.
Yeah, that worked. That was great, and it was actually really interesting to see. I hadn't seen it beforehand either, so
Yeah.
it was, or known about it. So now we do. We have one last little clip of video, I think, while we're doing that of Lily's. Would you like to show that now, and then we can even throw it open to the room a little early, as promised?
Yeah, I'll preface it slightly. Can you just pause it?
Yeah.
So this is a mood trailer that is for my upcoming MR visceral poem installation, now kind of moving into footprint with the headset inside of a physical space is very interesting to me. Bringing that kind of more viewers into kind of the art space and breaking down barriers between accessibility within this form. Essentially, Glass Invincible You, title's slightly been updated since this was cut, is a high-velocity journey that proposes that at the heart of fear, you can become your own superhero. So it's using that which we run from to potentially discover ourselves. This is based on a personal story. I've been stalked for 10 years by a man that saw me performing many years ago, and have since started a nonprofit and work with stalking and invisible violence is sort of what I'm referring to it in different forms. So this is one kind of powerful narrative around this topic that is a proposal for hope that puts us inside of some dark territory to find it. So Glass Invincible You. So this is collected imagery. Okay, this is a tonal mood board for a project in development.
Okay, great.
Turn up the volume a bunch if you can.
Okay, well, I don't want to disturb, but I'll ride the level. We'll see. Isn't that great? It's really pretty powerful, I think, when I first saw it. And I really didn't know what I was going to see at first. I thought a mixture of live action with the animated and the drawing. And I thought, is it going to be like Gene Kelly dancing with toon characters? But it's actually very, very, moving.
Thank you. I just want to say if I have a website and there's if anyone has, I just see some faces that are resonating with this. Please feel free to reach out around stalking.
Get right over
I'm
there.
a spokesperson and supporting, working with legislation there. Just if you know someone.
It's right up there, website. And so everyone here's had some, between Tribeca, South by Southwest, had some interesting successes in this field with this new technology within traditional film festival and sources now. How was that experience for you?
I'm sorry, I wasn't.
Anyway,
I didn't know you were talking to me. Yeah, go ahead.
I said all of you have had. This premiered at Sundance. You were at South by Southwest.
You're asking. Okay, I was thinking about that.
Tribeca.
A little lost.
Yeah.
How was the experience of sharing all of this in all of those spaces, essentially, or sort of stretching? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. It's been really wonderful in terms of through you kind of bringing that into. I recreated. I reshot. I wanted to find a way for the material that we shot to be seen in the Flatty space. So I actually reshot it through GoPro Player and premiered on Nowness and a couple other platforms, kind of with these fractured, layered renditions of POVs, and trying to find ways to keep the material moving. Also, in terms of audience, and so I've also built out a bunch of installations and work a lot with performers and actors, hiring them and bringing audience through this sort of very visceral, intimate experience. The piece begins, it can play cyclically, but you essentially, it's really high velocity. You kind of begin inside of this poetic orgasm and finish being burned alive. It's not lightweight. But it started some really interesting conversations. So it's been all around, and people, I think the key for me and Sashka was to pose questions, right? So it's not perfect, but it asks questions, and that's what we wanted to do.
It's kind of interesting. When we were talking, I mentioned there's a famous Chris Milk quote that talking about VR is like dancing about architecture. And I thought, well, why not dance about architecture? Yeah. And in fact, during our conversation earlier, I think Mike, you and Johannes were particularly talking about space in an architectural sense being used in this production.
We see already that the emotions are getting triggered quite directly with VR. Like, you can make something really powerful. Obviously, we've all seen movies that have moved us quite quickly. But if you wanna, I think the direct connection to the brain of your audience is the most present in VR, for obvious reasons, which can lead to all sorts of other applications, by the way. We're talking about entertainment and the movie language, but this is we can apply all those learnings and try to treat people's phobia, and try to do good in the world, but not that movies don't do good in the world, but you can actually alter the brain properly with the right studies. And we're starting to work together lots with the medical field as well to actually have studies that shown us, because so far we only have anecdotal evidence, and it seems to work really well, but there are studies made right now that hopefully support that case. And I think that's a very important part. Is like, entertainment is one leg of VR, but what we learn here is getting us all the way to all sorts of different fields.
Well, what we're really talking about is a new way of engaging with digital assets and the internet. So that's what this is all moving towards. It's just like taking all that stuff that's in a box and flat and moving it into a three-dimensional, world, physical world.
And just to your point, Johannes, earlier, about the nerds in the basement. I find those people really interesting, and I'm not I haven't been seen as one or see myself as one. So maybe
I'm
we
one.
should hang out. No, point being is, I think it's really fertile to work with people that, I love admitting what I don't know, but I work really hard at what I do know. So I think it's a really, all of these sort of, you get all of these people that are kind of segregated and geeky in their own right, in their own field, and together, and something really ripe can happen. So I think all of the differences that this forum invites is actually very cool.
One of the interesting things that dawned on me was listening to Skip Rizzo, who runs the Institute for Creative Technology. It's UC-based facility in Marina del Rey, and they've been working for years with a tricked-out Xbox, and working with soldiers with PTSD and exposure therapy. They started working with rape victims as well. And one of the nuances that Skip brought up was that in order to create this environment, to bring up a memory with the soldiers, he said, think in terms of production Band of Brothers. With the rape victims, it was more, he said, think Hitchcock. And the dark, and I thought, wow, that's a whole nother space for people with storytelling skills and creative production abilities. I mean, I bring that up with my students to say, look, there's a big world out there that this medium can address.
That's a wonderful point. I think as a creator of the work, obviously this is all about trying to reach an audience to give them a particular experience. But the act of creating it is just wildly satisfying. And the things that go right or wrong along the way, the process of discovery, the things that surprise you as you make this stuff, or as you struggle with the limitations of the medium, or the limitations of a budget, or whatever. But my God, get to work and make something cool, and go and have the most satisfying experience of your life.
Best thing that ever
creatively.
happened to me was when the film lab ruined my film, and I loved it. I used it all, but then they gave me tons more film and free development. So happy accidents in art. I want to throw it open to some questions before we're.
So I have a question in terms of live action narrative and integrating the user into the experience. Because I've watched live action narrative VR, and sometimes it is like, there's people who are directly referencing the user and even asking questions or saying, come with me, or whatever, that sort of guiding experience that you mentioned. But then there's also narrative VR where it's sort of like you're omniscient and you're watching something take place and you can kind of look around. So I guess I'm wondering, how do you navigate the choices between either having a sort of omniscient, non-participating user or having a participating user, and then how do you keep that participating user neutral enough so that any of us can step into that space and feel like, oh, it's me?
Yeah.
Like, for example, if it's a woman flirting or whatever, I automatically feel like I'm a man.
Yeah, you were, dude.
So, keeping it, neutral enough in a way where I still feel immersed and it's happening to me.
Yeah.
This is so tricky.
No, in this case, I just made you a guy. Like you just were a guy, and that was it. And if you didn't like that, then you could take off the headset. But yeah, I liked in my experiences making narrative.
Maybe it'll inspire you to think you're not straight. Just
you had a male voice. No, you had a male voice.
Oh, you had.
Yeah, you had a male voice. So because that was the thing, it was like being John Malkovich, where you were like trapped in this guy's head as he was engaging, and then in another case, I did one where you were you were a 6-year-old girl who couldn't speak. So I don't know. For me, the first person, the playing with the first person experience was always very exciting because I felt like it winked towards the potential of where this medium could head. And again, working inside the creative limitations, if you can't speak, that would explain why you're not, talking.
I'll chime in on this a little bit as well. So our it's not live action, the first piece that we took to Sundance a couple of years ago, but so we have you step into the role of one of our main characters, and it's called The Abbot's Book. And in this, the first draft of the piece, we give you a little bit of an introduction, and then we just kind of set you loose in the world at 6 degrees of freedom. You're in this 17th century Italian kind of spooky world, and people got this notion as they were going, but it became far clearer when we began we said, let's begin this experience by literally having somebody step into an avatar And so here we have this sort of ghostly form of this character that you're about to play. And you know, with the luxury of 6 degrees of freedom, you literally walk into this person, we fade to black, we fade back up, you're holding a torch that he was holding, and it's this moment of transformation that suddenly kind of activated people in this role-playing mode. And it was really neat to see.
I will say we use that too in Crow, which is a project we did before 7/16th, which was exactly that. You open a door, giant doors open, you walk in, they slam behind you, and then you fade into this alien temple kind of place. And that works really well.
And also quickly to add to that is, once again, the games industry has probably solved a lot of those micro problems, at least in bits, or has a lot of examples for you to study. So I would suggest to actually start playing computer games a lot. Like I don't anymore, but actually it helps a lot because there's a diversity in the computer games market by now. So there's a game for everybody, and there are certain core mechanics and core ways of how to guide your attention, how to make you feel there that have been done in this industry a lot. But it keeps getting overlooked, especially by Hollywood, I think, a bit. I think it not everything, but I think you can definitely research there a lot to see at least mechanics that you think work and then try them out and hopefully not fail too often.
I would say prototype, try. An idea in action, in reality, is never, it's never matches. So just get some, make sure you can try to see what works. So I've done a bunch.
Here after.
Hi, it's a question for Pete. Very impressed with the trailer. What's the project called again?
The 7/16th.
The what?
The 7/16th.
On the 7/16th. I mean, normally I'm used to seeing VR pieces that have been done in conjunction with like The Jungle Book or an existing movie, The Martian. They did some amazing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This seems like you're kind of reverse engineering in a way. Can you tell us a little bit about what your business model was for doing this piece in terms of and how it's worked out or working out?
Yeah, well, because for every we have a lot of ideas in our little shop, and certain things we feel can resonate better first as a VR or a filmed piece. And we look at each one and try to figure out, like, okay, from a business standpoint, who can we attach to this to anchor it as a film or TV show? So there's a business aspect to it that we really think about. We realized that VR may not be the first place to monetize in certain situations as we're watching everything kind of grow. We think it's going to pick up, and we're all I love video games and I love VR and I play everything I can. But at the end of the day, we just have to make a business decision, which is how can we rest on something that we know is a little more tried and true. So for us, we have a film background, we have TV backgrounds, and so when we look at this, we think, okay, should this be a show? Can it be a show? Should we shoot something that looks like it can grow in one aspect so that we can then grow this other thing separately but together, right? Like it's another vehicle like VR and immersive anything, and we are looking at location-based content too. I mean, on a location basis, like walking through a maze and things like that, like the Star Wars Void experience, and seeing like, how can what we're creating be a game or a VR experience or a TV show, and which should come first depends on business and also a little bit of timing, like creatively, like who can we get to write this or film it or put it together in a way that happens the fastest. And so certain projects just kind of get a life of their own in one medium and then organically kind of spread to something else.
Maybe I didn't understand. This is all that exists so far.
Exactly.
So this is a trailer, a proof of concept for something that you would turn into either a film or a bigger VR.
Right, that's a trailer to a much bigger. It's already shot. I didn't want to bore everybody. Actually, it's very exciting, but I didn't want to show everyone a whole long film here. But yeah, the trailer's meant to showcase the bigger project's already shot, which is it's a slice. What you'd watch if you saw the whole thing was a day in the life of these two doctors that rescue these two soldiers and how this giant galactic war finds them in some remote outpost in the middle of as part of space, right? And so that world is created, and then we think, okay, we've got this world that is a linear piece for this, and it could be an interactive piece for this. And once we write the Bible for it, we create it holistically all together, and then we kind of pitch that out. So we do that for everything, and just sometimes things happen first, and we don't always make it a conscious effort. It's like sometimes it's a game first, or a VR experience first, or a TV/film first, linear thing first. It just happens organically as we create the project.
It's
In this case, the
it's
filmmaker was amazing and came up with something that we had to, he had to
It's
shoot.
interesting to bring in that branching. How do you work that into the script? When, bringing those gaming aspects into the cinematic experience.
Well, I mean, it really just depends on each project, but I think in this case, we just, sci-fi is an easy world to expand, and so, there's a million things in our heads that we'd love to do with the time and the budget. And then we just think, because we have these different folks in our office, and these amazing filmmakers that think about video games as well as merchandising, all the other things that kind of, you talk to a studio and it becomes marketable, becomes a business, and then you say, this is how we could blow up this so it's not just a show, because typically TV doesn't, yeah, it makes money, but everybody wants something else. Everyone wants how is Disney making so much money with the way they do merchandising, and they've built these worlds. And so as we look at it, we try to do it in our own small little humble little shop and try to create those same kind of things where things that happen in the show can refer to things happening in other parts, whether it's a comic book or
science fiction,
VR game.
With science fiction and fiction in general, you still have a way to control that user's energy. Mike, you were brought up an interesting issue. That's what happens and how does it happen, and what happens when the unscripted environment is broken.
Oh, the billion ways that
Yeah.
if you're making a 6 Degrees of Freedom experience, it can break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. No, actually, there's a wonderful quality to this sort of shared enterprise of saying, hey, I'm going to tell you a story, and tens or hundreds or thousands of people are going to go through it. There's this very pleasant surprise, actually, in doing that, where you find, oh my God, the human brain works in more predictable ways than I ever would have guessed, but for reasons that are sometimes hard to guess at the beginning of the process. Just as a tiny example, so there's a point in this Abbott's book project where you come into a space and you're down in these spooky catacombs, and they're a little bit dark, and you can go in and light some fires to brighten the place up a little bit. For reasons that I still don't understand, like 95% of the people that go up to this one particular location will light this fire and then turn left. And I have no idea why almost everybody turns left at that point, for reasons that are totally beyond me. There's no sound over here, there's no light cue, there's nothing. It's just a blank wall, and people turn in that direction. And that's one tiny sort of borderline trivial example, but but the point is that as you're building these experiences, you find yourself flowing in sort of realms of how does attention work. And obviously there are all these tricks that we can use, light something up, make a sound effect, change something in the environment in a way that's perhaps barely noticeable or perhaps much more overt.
And do you hear Laurel or do you hear Yanni?
Oh my God!
To the point as well is like there's lots of tricks that we use to solve the locomotion problem to actually trick your brain successfully. The problem is that you have a small play space, and if you want to walk a long distance, well, how do you make sure that you can walk around, and how do we redirect your walking without you noticing it? There's lots of tricks. For example, if you walk into a room, present a monitor on one corner with text that you have to read. If you walk into that room in VR and you watch the text, and behind you I make a door move to a totally different location, and you turn around and you accept it, because you don't keep that track of exactly where the door was. Nobody's like, oh shit, the door moved. So there's all sorts of tricks and, that we have to still learn and to figure out.
We need good continuity people.
Good. And quickly to your production question from before, I think it's very important, and I see it starting slowly in the whole Hollywood film industry. Is that if VR and the interactive experience is an afterthought, it's not as good as if it's thought through, of course, from the beginning, because there's a lot of set scanning and it gets all better, and all the technologies are merging together. That I urge people to, if you're trying to take VR for seriously in your whatever project that you're doing, is start from the beginning, because the world can expand or the technology can expand, but you need to make sure that it's not a missed opportunity that once the set of Harry Potter is gone, we can't scan it anymore.
No, exactly. That's exactly how we work, so that we think about everything. That's a perfect point that I should have mentioned as well, that the production the design and the creation of everything is uniform, and we leverage as much as we can on the tech side. Even using an engine to film the show, which we're seeing emerge more and more these days. Certain parts of it, right, versus a green screen. So all those things come into play when we think about producing.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I've been given the movement sign. I know we're not in a disco dance class, so unfortunately. It'd be kind of fun, but I'd like to thank our panelists, and there'll be time to ask more questions as we're moving out of the room. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.